thank you for having me, and obviously it's a lot of time's passed, or I guess that's relative. It's been a little over a year since this incident happened, and of course, you know, it's been a process of going through and letting things kind of settle and see what shakes out on the other end, so to speak. But first and foremost, I really just want to start by thanking everybody here at College Park. The support was just incredible, and it meant so much to us, so much for Suzanne, you know, because she had to hold the ship together the whole time by herself and do so many things. And so all the prayers and the support, because so many people came by and visited and sent cards and called the house. So we are so grateful for that. And we had so many prayers that were answered. So thank you first and foremost for all that. And because Suzanne and I are both very grateful. And to the Project Outreach folks that came and planted flowers in our yard, I could just go on and on, but thank you for everything. And like I said, it's taken some time to really speak about this incident. I've spoken operationally a number of times about it, you know, covering the fire side of it and that operation and things like that. But the faith-based side is something that I haven't spoken too widely about. And of course, it started really with Michael and I talking some time back, because shortly after this incident, it just dawned on me, became very apparent that there were a lot of little pieces that fell into place that day. There was a perfect storm that put us into that situation, but there was also a perfect storm that got us out of that. And so that's what I'd like to share with everyone here. And of course, part of that process is, Michael mentioned it this last week, you know, you wait for the time is right, or you wait thinking, well, you'll wait till you get your life right, or that kind of thing. And then, you know, I think he said it just doesn't happen. So, so this is a good time to, you know, for me to do this. And like I said, it's been a process. And, you know, at the same time, I'm kind of apprehensive because, you know, I know my own personal flaws. And, you know, you always think to deliver a message or that kind of thing, you know, about your own ability or your own sense of worth, so to speak. You know, I guess that's human nature. That's my nature. You know, am I the one that should be doing this? But by the same token, it was such a close call for me. I do feel compelled, and that's why I'm here. And thanks to Michael for inviting me. Basically, I think this incident, sometimes in life we're fortunate enough to be presented with the quote-unquote proof of God, and I really think that's what this incident was for me. I've had a few other incidents in my life where I felt like that was definitely the case, where, you know, God's existence was undeniable. And the thing about that is the beauty to me about when that happens, it usually, for my sake, my situation, it's typically happened in the worst of times, when God does quote unquote reveal his existence. But the value of that revelation, no pun intended, but the value of that event just keeps going, because I can't tell you how many times I fall back on these little moments of what I consider proof, you know, to carry me forward through the difficult times. It's like another cliche, the gift that keeps on giving, you know. So the next time a hard time comes up, or doubt, or you know, when you just, one of those why me moments, you know, it gives you something to fall back onto. And that's the way I feel about this. And these moments just reinforce that concept. And my dad used to talk about that. He was in the 95th Infantry Division in Patton's 3rd Army in World War II. And he never talked a lot about anything, but he did talk about a particular incident, I guess you would say his moment during the Battle of the Bulge, and things were getting really bad, and he didn't think he was going to make it out, and yet he did. And he always talked about that being his moment, you know, it guided his life. And he was very fond of the statement. There's a phrase they used to use back in there: there's no atheists in the foxholes. And you know, I don't know if that's still a relevant statement today. I mean, if that still circulates around, but back in that day and age, it was a very popular statement. It was also a reality. But what we'll do, for me to share with you the event, the part I feel that does for me reveal proof of God. What I'll do first is tell you about what happened that day and tell you about the event. And what I'll start with, though, is a little video trailer that I've got. And this is from our department's documentary. But it kind of tells you what I can't really describe to you what it looked like that day. And it's very short. It's only a minute, and that's the only video I'll show.
Based on a true story.
So it does, I mean, it gives you the produced side of the event, but it also gives you some pictures that I can't adequately describe about what happened that day. And just to kind of tell you, this is the building that we went on the fire before it ever burned, obviously. And we were just sitting at the kitchen table. This was any normal day. It happened to be a day right before our transfer, so in all actuality, I'm 19 hours and 15 minutes from going to another station for the next 2 years. So it's another one of those almost moments. But we got dispatched on a car fire. And a car fire in the fire department is not, every fire is dangerous, let me say that, but a car fire is not necessarily we send one engine, and it's not that big of a deal normally. You go and you put out the fire and you try to determine what started it. Well, as we're leaving, we're getting dressed to leave the station, they upgrade it to a structure fire. And so what happens then is they add all the other units that should be on the structure fire, like on a house fire, that kind of thing. This is a commercial building, so they added more units to go with us. And then as we're going down the road, they came and they said, well, the car is inside a building. So we went up Elm Eugene, we turned off onto Elm Street where they split, and I could see a lot of smoke as we came around the turn. And then we pulled up to a fire hydrant, and the guys on the back asked me, said, do you want us to use this hydrant? And I said, yes, let's do. I couldn't see the fire yet, but I could see the smoke, and so I knew somebody's got to bring some water to this one. So we hooked to that hydrant. Turned out to be about 400 feet from the building, and we laid our line, that's what we call it. The line pulls off the back of the truck. And once we got there, we stopped in front of the building and got off the truck, and I saw a huge amount of fire. This building, you can kind of see, has got, there's three businesses here. This one is a body shop. The front one is a medical supply business. And then this is an auto repair shop, and that's the side it started on. So we got our hose line and got one of our larger hoses and went up to that door, that roll-up door, and the fire was just blowing out. We couldn't go in if we wanted to. So we operated our hose there for just trying to push the fire back for about 2 minutes. And finally, as we're doing that though, these doors, these roll-up doors keep coming down in front of us. And of course we're trying to hit the fire that's coming back over top of us. So finally, we're able just to reach up and pull those doors to the ground. So then we've got these piles of doors laying in front of us. And another company, Ladder 7, comes up with us. Well, about that time, we all go in together, and Ladder 7 actually goes in first. And they get in a little deeper than we are. And we're kind of in the middle of the building, and the fire's just coming back over top of us. And again, we just keep spraying the water on the fire and trying to push it back. And we're inside about 2 more minutes probably. And of course, the visibility's not too good. But we can, I've got a thermal imaging camera, and so after a couple minutes, one of my crew members says, well, how does it look? And I look through our thermal imaging camera, and that lets you see heat flows and things like that. And I said, well, I think we're making progress. I think we can go deeper. Well, when I said that, out of the corner of my eye behind me, I saw fire blazing up, and it looked like it was going to get between us and the door. Well, in the world of firefighting, you don't let that happen, because you've got one way out, or in this building we had one way out essentially, and we couldn't let the fire get between us and the door. So we actually turned, and the last thing I remember seeing before we turned was there were big steel beams that, if we're in, say, if this were the building, the beams run exactly like these do, parallel to the street. And so we're under one of these beams, and the last move we made was to actually turn and retreat back toward the fire to keep it from cutting us off. Well, that was the last move we made, because as soon as we did, the roof came down. And of course, I didn't realize what had happened at that point. I didn't realize it was the roof. I just knew something big had fallen in. And I found myself just pushed down to the concrete. And I was on my back, and my fire mask stayed on. And of course I was laying there, and I took a deep breath, and I held it, because that's what we're trained to do, is hold our breath, because we don't know how long it's going to take us for somebody to get us out. So I'm holding my breath, and I feel the weight. I've got these burning beams of wood laying across my body, and I tried to call my own mayday. That's when we get in trouble, we call mayday. And so I tried to reach for my radio mic to call the mayday. Well, I couldn't move my left arm. And then I tried to get under my coat and reach the radio itself, because we have an emergency button. And I couldn't get to my radio button. My arms were just really pinned by my sides. And so I was sitting there and laying there actually. And the weight of that roof's just getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And by this time I'm still holding my breath, and I can feel that my boots are hanging out, and so I'm trying to kick my boots. And of course, one of my crew members, Joe Denny, he calls the mayday right away. And of course, you hear him in that piece. He says Captain Sterling Suddarth, and of course, I don't care if he mispronounced my name in the heat of the moment or not. That was good. And anyway, he called the mayday. Well, that helped me actually even under there, because I realized 2 things. I realized, well, Joe's not under here. And also, he knows where I'm at. And so that's my perspective. But to tell you kind of what's going on, and I'll come back to my situation, but to tell you about the ladder guys, there's 3 of them. And the 4th one had actually joined us, so I did have 2 other people with me. Well, the 3 of them get up near the car that started the fire, and they're up there, and when the roof comes down, they get pushed to the floor, and they're actually in between 2 of these steel beams. So they're kind of walled off and fenced in, and 2 of them's masks get knocked off, 2 radios get ejected, and so one guy is calling their mayday, and you kind of, I guess you don't hear it on here, but there's multiple maydays coming out, because they've got their own mayday, and people are calling my mayday. And so we've got two different emergencies going on at the same time. Well, the guys on ladder 7, and I'll kind of paraphrase to get it, not to take up too much time, but they basically recover in that condition. And when the roof comes in and caves in like that, what was normal and what was just fully charged with smoke now becomes an inferno. Everything's on fire, and the fire is just blazing everywhere. And I can kind of show you, that's what it looked like right after the collapse. And so the fire's everywhere, and there's 6 of us in there, and the 2 that were with me, Joe Denny and Phil Ruth, they're able to get out pretty quickly because they got knocked down, but because of where they were in proximity to the door, they were pretty close and they got out. The ladder 7 guys, they end up rescuing themselves and having to crawl through the steel, and they get out. Well, there I am pinned and holding my breath, and I went to let that air out. Well, when I let that air out, I didn't realize that was the only breath I was going to get, because the beam was across my chest, and the beams were burning, but it was so heavy that it compressed my airline. So when I went to get my next breath, the fire mask just glued to my face. And if you've not worn a fire mask, the only thing I can tell you is it would be like when somebody puts a bag over your head, so to speak, because everything just becomes a vacuum. And except it just gets tighter and tighter. And that's all I could do was sit there and try to breathe. And I heard them crank up chainsaws. That was their first plan to get me out, were to use the chainsaws. And of course that got canceled pretty quickly because they couldn't see what they were cutting. And visibility was bad. And if they do what we call plunge the saw, then there's a chance they're going to cut me. So they nixed that idea. Well, to make a long story short, there's 2 rescue teams plus another company of people. There end up being 12 to 14 people working just on me, and it takes them 6 minutes to get me out. So from the Mayday until they pull me out, there are 6 minutes, and I got 1 breath of air. So by the time they pulled me out, I'm not breathing anymore. I'm in respiratory arrest, obviously, and they can't even get an airway in. So another company, Engine 4, takes over the medical care. There's just so many people that contributed to my survival, and they just basically did what they could do and used what we call a bag valve mask, where they're just breathing for you until they could get me to the hospital. And of course then let the folks with more advanced techniques take over. So that's really what happened that day. But the thing about it is there are so many little pieces that fit together that what I try to share, because that's the incident in a very condensed version. Obviously I could talk about that for a long time, but there are right after this happened, I wrote out the little things. I wrote out the things that that I felt were significant that day, that if any one of them had gone a different way, things could have been worse, not just for me, but for other people. And I call them the 15 faith-based perspectives of that day. And it was just things that went inexplicably right. And and without any one of those going the other way, and it could have been bad, as I already said. So I'll just, when I reveal these or show these to you, and that's why I have a slide, just to try to show a relevance to what I'm talking about at the time. I think anybody would say that, sure, 2 or 3 of these things working out, or things are coincidental, things like that. But for us, there were 15, and there's more probably. But just from my perspective, things that I could identify very shortly while the incident was fresh, there was 15 different things, and to me, these 15 things all point towards God's hand in this and that day. And so I'll just tell you what those are. First and foremost, that's a picture of the building very early when we got there. But this building isn't even in our first in territory. It's Engine 4's first due territory. Engine 4's down on Goral Street. Engine 4's on another call that day. Well, if they go on this fire, there's a good chance that they're going to get there well before we did, and they're going to end up deeper inside this building before the collapse happens. Because from our perspective, just to kind of let you know, from sitting at the kitchen table till the collapse is roughly 13 minutes. And that is really just something I never thought could happen on a masonry building like this, especially I'm going on a car fire. So obviously there were a couple other factors. The fire started supposedly about 10 minutes before we ever got the call, and the car was elevated on a hydraulic lift very close under the steel beams. But the point about it is that engine 4 likely would have been there sooner, and being deeper in this building was not the place to be, because when it failed catastrophically. And the second, I mentioned that we stopped and hooked up to that hydrant down the street. Well, I didn't realize at the time there was a hydrant up in front of the building, but just the fact that we hooked up to that hydrant, you can see one of my crew, he caught the hydrant, that's what we call it, and that kept him from ever getting in the building. So that alone, you know, again, the less people that were in there, the better. There were already 6 of us in there, so that kept one of my crew members out. The second, this is a picture that was taken right before we went in, and the fact that we weren't able to enter this building, it took us 2 minutes to make any progress. If we'd been able to go right in, we would have been in a different spot. So just the inability to enter this building held us up. And when we have a 13-minute time frame from kitchen table to concrete floor, every moment's precious, and we didn't realize that day. But just the fact of the amount of time it took us to get in there. And then I already talked about this, but the last move we made was to move out from under one of those steel beams. And you can kind of see the one I think we were under at the time was there, because the ladder guys ended up in here. Well, if we don't make that last move back towards the fire to cut us off, then we're going to be under the steel. And somehow too, the ladder 7 guys weren't under the steel. So just the whole thing that there's 6 people inside this building and everybody avoids the steel, because the steel would have been exponentially heavier, and because it was supporting the wood. And so the steel, when the steel came down, it went to the ground. And so that's just another point that just the fact that 6 people were in there and nobody ended up under any of that. Of course, that's just a picture of where they found me, under there, but a little bit more inside the building. Another big factor about this was in reference to the steel, was this was a combination of wood and steel. And so if, first of all, if anybody's it gets pinned under the steel, they're probably not getting out. But secondly, from a heat standpoint, when steel gets hot enough to fold in, it is extremely hot. And I don't know what that will do to the human body, but I do know that the thermal conductivity for steel is significantly higher than it is for wood. And so even with those beams burning on me, I was better off with that than I was, under hot steel, because the wood still burned significantly, but I can't imagine what steel does to the body, when it's that hot and it just lays down. And there's a picture of it after it came out, and how distorted it became, because you go from a nice frame piece of steel to just a twisted mess. And so that tells you something about the heat inside. And another thing about these beams, I had one across my chest, one across my arm and my stomach, and another across my thigh, and another across my shin. Well, it's just inches from the mask. If that beam is just a few more inches up, then it goes through the mask. And that's going to be catastrophic, because I'm not going to survive that. And so, it's like that old term, what a difference an inch makes. Well, at least a few in this case, from here to here. The other thing is that I told you about my air getting cut off. Well, it was a blessing that I couldn't move my arms, because the fire guys know this. If you lose your air, whether you're training or things like that, if you lose your air, that mask is coming off, or you're at least going to crack it. I couldn't move, so I had to literally just keep trying to breathe through that mask, and of course it's getting tighter and tighter, but I had no choice. But if I had had the freedom of one arm and I could have gotten to that mask, I would have taken it off. And you kind of saw what the building looked like after the roof came in. That's going to become an unsurvivable event most likely, because it's probably going to, well, I know facial and respiratory burns are going to be significant, and over a 6-minute time period, I don't think I get out of that one if that's the case. So just another little piece that day. And of course you might wonder some of the things as I was telling you what happened that day, why I mentioned them, like pulling down the roll-up doors. Well, those doors kept getting in our way. Well, ironically enough, when that chunk of roof came down, there was a piece of the steel track from the door that we pulled down under the roof, helping support the weight of it like a kickstand. That's what the guys on the rescue company told me. They estimated that chunk of roof to weigh between 8,000 and 9,000 pounds. If I've got 8,000 or 9,000 pounds on me, I'm not coming out either, And I'm not saying that it was the track necessarily by itself. I have no idea what was holding up that roof besides that. But just for them to point that out to me, and just also for something that we just did, to get it out of our way, just little pieces that all came together. But you can kind of see the steel going there, and then it goes back underneath. And of course that's the side view where they found me, and you can see the wood beams. Another big factor in this was the way the collapse happened. When this steel got so hot, it literally just folded in and followed the path of least resistance. Well, steel is known to expand. As a matter of fact, it expands 9.5 inches per 100 feet at 1,000 degrees. In case you didn't know that. But what happens in this kind of building, when the steel gets that hot, it can, and it has happened in other buildings, it expands. Well, when it expands, it kicks the walls down. And when it kicks the walls down, the roof comes down at one time, and we call it a pancake collapse, like a stack of pancakes landing on top of each other. Well, that didn't happen. The inside held, and so it created what we call a lean-to, and that creates these void spaces in there where people can survive in this event. Because if it pancakes and we've got 6 people in there, everybody's pinned and everybody's burning, and there's not enough rescue people to get everybody out. And so that's just another thing that day. And of course there's reasons that the inside held. It was welded to that side and things like that. But if those welds give way, then we've got a big problem. And so just another piece of like I said, this big perfect storm that day. And there's a picture of the building. And of course this is before the collapse, but you can see the smoke in it and how much it's charging. And then that's after it collapses, it just goes to, it's a catastrophic failure. That's what we call it, because essentially it didn't fail in one place. It just folded in a lot of places. And so, you go from this to that in a matter of seconds. And like I said, 6 people in there at the same time. Another factor about this fire is when we go on fires, we set up what are called rapid intervention crews, or I'll just use the term rescue teams. We set these teams up for this reason, for when firefighters get in trouble, when people fall through floors or have emergencies. And it's it's required to have a rescue team on fires. But in the years I've been on the fire department, and no one else have I ever talked to since then, and I've talked to just about everybody in the department, none of us can remember when there were 2 rescue teams set up this early in the incident. Because these 2 teams get set up pretty within minutes before the collapse. And from my perspective, it takes every person, both teams and others as well, because what happens is, this is while we're inside and they're bringing hose to us, but one of the ladder companies was inside, Ladder 5 was inside this front building. Well, they came back out and they helped on the rescue. And then the training division, a couple of guys were there, and one of them came and got in there, and another one grabbed a hose line because they're having to fight the fire while they're doing the rescue. But the big thing about this is, we just don't get 2 rescue teams set up this early. And normally we don't even have the people available to do 2 rescue teams, because one of the things that happened was when we were initially dispatched on this car fire, they sent us by ourselves. Well, normally on a structure fire, they're just going to add enough units to us to give us a full structure fire response. And what happened was they, for whatever reason, they added a whole structure fire response on top of us, which gave us 3 engines, 3 ladders, and a battalion chief. Well, we got 1 extra unit there, and then within a minute of my arrival on the scene, one of the battalion chiefs came on and he added Rescue 5, our rescue team. Probably the best, they are the best equipped and best trained to handle this kind of situation. Well, they're not coming on this fire normally, because it's not that kind of building that gets this type of response. So just having enough units while that happened that day, and then just having the 2 rescue teams set up and have them right there in such close proximity was just something else that, again, I've asked them if there hadn't been 2 teams or there'd been less people, could they have gotten me out? And the answer is unanimously no. And there's just a picture of the event going on while the rescue's going on. And of course, that's what they walked into. So I can never say enough about them and what they did that day. As far as I'm concerned, and I won't go on about it, but when I do internal programs, I really do, because they checked their lives at the door that day for me, and left it. And it wasn't like they ran in and got me out either. It took 6 minutes. So people are having to fight the fire. People are having to do the rescue. It just goes on and on. One of the things I mentioned is related to this. I was talking about the ladder guys in there with us, Ladder 7, and they're in deeper than we are. Well, they're able to rescue themselves. If they don't get out by themselves, first of all, they're probably not going to make it, because finding them inside that building, sending in rescue teams is very improbable. To not necessarily send them in, but to find them. The other side of the coin is, if they keep calling Mayday, they're going to have to try to send somebody after them. Instead, they rescue themselves and they start spilling out of the building. Well, because they rescued themselves, it kept 12 to 14 people working on me. If they have to split those teams up, it's the same thing I've asked them. Could you have done it with half the people? Could you have done it with 7 or 4? And it's still unanimously no. It took every single person, every single unit that day to do it. And so Ladder 7 might not necessarily have been helping lift that roof off of me, but they had a big part in me surviving this incident by them saving themselves. Another thing, and again, this is about, I've got these 12 to 14 people working on me. Well, some are fighting the fire and everybody's trying to lift this roof. Chainsaws were plan A. Brute force was plan B. And they're all in there trying to lift this. There's heavy fire conditions and the roof's not moving. And one particular captain from training came, one of the chiefs from training, the whole training division came because they were on lunch and they heard a commercial fire downtown. And of course, firemen are like moths to the flame. We like to go see what's happening. So they did, and thankfully they did, because when they got there, their intention was, hey, we're going to get suited up and go in and help. Well, when they went in, or as they got there and they were getting suited up, the collapse happens. While these people are in there trying to lift this roof, one of the guys from Ladder 7 makes it out, the guys that self-rescued. Well, he's hurt. He's helped one of the really bad hurt from their company get out, he goes back in to help too. And they find this pry bar. And from what I've been told, the roof's just not coming up. Well, they find a pry bar leaning against the wall. And so they get the idea, well, let's try this. And they stick that pry bar underneath the roof, and they start lifting with all those other people lifting at the same time. The roof, they get it up enough to pull me out. Again, 6 minutes, one breath of air. And so what happens if the extra people don't come? What happens if one of the rescue teams doesn't bring the pry bar in the building? It's actually a New York hook, but it was used as a pry bar, and so I won't go into what a New York hook is. But who brings it in? Who puts it against the wall right beside the rescue? All these little pieces, again, just come together. And I've talked about the time. Well, 6 minutes, one breath of air. The National Institute of Health says brain damage can start after 4 minutes, and brain death can start 4 to 6 minutes later. And I've got 6 minutes with one breath. Well, I don't know how close that is for me, but I know if they don't get me out of there when they got me out of there, time is running out fast, probably at 6 minutes. I mean, for me to have my faculties, or most of what I started with anyway. But that's a big factor, because if this doesn't work, Plan C, which I haven't talked about, Plan C are what we call high lift jacks and airbags. That's where they have to bring in other equipment to start lifting the roof. Well, inflatable airbags, I don't know how they're going to behave in a fire. I mean, they might have done fine, but time, it's going to take time. Lifting that roof with a jack is going to take time, and I've been in there 6 minutes. And of course, one other point that I don't talk about is like one of the 15 was that one of the companies, Ladder 5, did get under there, and they saw the roof burning on me. And so they actually used a hose line to hose me down. And of course, the way I was laying in the building, they could only get to my left side, but as a result, I only have one burn on my left side. Everything's down the right. And of course, I've kidded with them. I said, I sure am glad y'all did that, because if you didn't, I wouldn't be having half the fun I'm having now. But it's very true, while I don't put that as like one of my 15 points, if they don't hose me down, I mean, how bad are the burns, beyond that? And because I know how bad they were with them hosing me down. And I won't speculate about that, but that's just another point. Another big factor in this fire, this happened at lunchtime, middle of the day. If this fire happens at night, there's a lot of things that aren't going to happen. Number one, we're not going to have training division respond. Those guys that came in to help. We're not even going to have, we might not even have battalion chief listening that says, hey, add Rescue 5 to the call. So the odds are, not only are we not having the number of people come, all our response times are going to be probably slower too. So if you get there first on scene like we did, and you go charging in there, you may not have any help coming, not enough to get you out of there when things go bad. And then there's plenty of factors about this fire happening at night. The Ladder 7 guys, one of whom is a pastor, by the way, he says that what got them out was when they were in there and those two steel beams, like if you can imagine these these beams falling, and you're between them, they don't know which way's out at that point. They're disoriented. Well, the daylight shone through one of those trusses. And of course, he refers to that as seeing the light. And he's very serious about, that's what got them out. They went to the light and it got them out of the building. And that doesn't happen if this is at night. All of us are probably going to be wearing different things under our turnout gear that, and that's another point I try to make. If it's at nighttime, I know I always slept in nylon gym shorts. Well, nylon in direct flame is going to melt, and so I've got big problems then. And so just so many things about this fire happening at the moment it did, and having the people, there was a big retirement ceremony going on at the fire department. So all these people were converged in one spot on Church Street. So when it happens, they just all come down there. like I said, to see what's going on and get there and see what is going on. And of course, they're able to jump in and start helping. And ultimately, the last thing is that in our industry, you don't have a commercial building come down usually with 6 people inside and all 6 live. And overwhelmingly, because we get all the reports, line of duty death, roof collapse is not a good thing. I mean, you put 2 companies of people in there, and I don't want to predict how many, is the average, but you just don't have situations in heavy fire. You don't even have it in where is it, up north somewhere, a roof fell in. Of course, people lived in that, but it fell in because of the snow. But this is fire, and you just don't have these type of situations where 6 people are inside a building on fire, the roof comes down, and then it lights off like that, and everybody gets out. So those are really my 15 points. And like I said, it's you could look at any one of them and say, well, that's coincidental. Whether it took us 2 minutes to get in the door, whether we pulled the doors down to the ground and they helped support the roof, whether I left my guy at the hydrant 400 feet down the street, all these little pieces. But when I put them all together, like I said, in one bundle, the perfect storm, to me, that's God's hand that day. And I don't really know, obviously with that, when I look, Michael has talked about receiving grace. And so I don't know why I received grace that day. I mean, it's not because I deserve it, that's for darn sure. And so, you just don't know because firefighters die all the time, police officers. It have people, accidents, So I don't know why that day things happened the way they did, why 6 of us, and me especially, received, grace. And as Michael said, every day is grace now because, it was so very close. And of course, by the same token, I'm kind of hesitant to ask because there's that little part in me that, still remembers or still has the thought that, well, you don't really want to ask God why He does something when He does something good because He might change His mind, that kind of thing. But it was just a big day of grace. And to talk about another aspect, the angels without wings that we've all talked about. I've got 12 to 14, and really it's more than that because there's 12 to 14 to get me out, but then there's 4 or 5 more doing medical care. There's guys fighting the fire from other places to keep it off of the rescue. So I probably have 25 angels without wings helping me. But it didn't really just stop there. It was at the emergency room at Moses Cone when they got me breathing again. And then when they took me to the burn center, all the nurses and the CNAs and so many, like I said, angels without wings. Suzanne, my goodness, she's my, chief angel, the one I answer to. But, I could, just coming home, the way she had, the things she had to do for me to treat the wounds, things that, you just don't maybe go into the relationship thinking that's what you're going to do one day. It's just incredible. And I can't say enough about her. But also, everybody here at the church and my family and my friends, just so many people to be thankful for. And all this comes together really to say, or to, and I said this to Ann one day when we were talking, I said, it was a terrible day, or what was one of the worst days of my life, but actually in an odd sort of way, it was maybe one of the best days of my life. Because, how often do we get afforded a second chance when everything's so close to being lost? Your time and your relationships and your opportunities to live, all that's just about taken away from you, and you get it back. And it's not, I don't know, I kind of refer to it as a system reboot for the computer people in here. You know, you get a system reboot, so it's kind of a gift. I mean, it's sure it comes with baggage, but like I said earlier, when these moments that I've had in my life where I got the proof of God, they came in. It wasn't because everything was great. I mean, I try to be thankful then too, especially, but the times when things just seem hopeless and overwhelmingly just bad, you know, that's when this has happened to me in the past, and that's how I can look at this day, and I guess it was really my outlook from the start, because I remember at the burn center they still had this is the first day, and they've got all these tubes in my throat, and I'm coming to just enough to think I can't breathe. So I'm starting to fight those and do everything I can, and I'm trying to tell them to turn up the oxygen, and they don't understand what I'm saying. So, but after what happens is, you know, I go back out for a while, and then at some point later, I wake up and they take those tubes out, and they ask me, they said, well, how do you feel? And I said, thankful. And that was just because that was the first thing that came to my mind, because I didn't know what had happened, or I didn't know how bad things were, but what I did know was that I'm not in that building anymore. I'm not on my back. Somehow, some way, I made it out of there. And that was just, I mean, that was like from the get-go all I could think about, because I guess I had also, Suzanne had talked to me. The only other moment I remember in Greensboro was when they let her talk to me, and she got real close to my face and was telling me it was going to be okay. And I remembered that later, and then I remembered, you know, so I had just enough to know that I'm not in that building. You know, whatever happened, I'm not there. So that's been kind of what drives me now. And I guess I'll end with kind of what the conclusion of, you know, what to do now. You know, from my perspective, I mean, what do you do with this? And the only thing I can think is, or, you know, just to try to live a better life and be a better person, and give more and pray more and love more, and try to pay it forward, you know. And if that's means trying to help other firefighters so that this doesn't happen to them again, or if it's just trying to tell other people, you know, maybe when they have moments of doubt, because, you know, we all have them. Well, I say we all do. I shouldn't say that, but I mean, but to me, these pieces of proof, you know, are always there, and they always just keep reinforcing. It's always like something to fall back to. I don't know. I mean, it sounds cliche, but the guy that climbs up the mountain and puts his chocks in as he goes up, well, it's like the chocks are like pieces of proof, because when he falls back to the last chalk he put in, you know, instead of falling all the way back to the bottom. And so I guess that's kind of how I look at it. And so it's just, you know, I don't know why this happened. I don't know, and I don't fully know what to do with it, but I just know to try to, you know, like I said, pay it forward in whatever way I can do that. And so, again, I appreciate everybody listening and coming tonight on your Wednesday nights. And if anybody has any questions or anything, you know, this is obviously very informal for me, and or comments, and I'm all ears.
If anybody has a question, or if anybody can.
Yes, sir.
I'm real big in looking for God in the little things, and I'm so impressed. You found big things looking for God in the little things. It's just a wonderful presentation. What a faith, brother. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks. Yes, ma'am.
Did they rename you Mr. Miracle?
No, nobody's really given me. I probably have lots of names to look forward to when I make it back to the line.
I think you are a miracle.
So, well, thank you. I mean, I'm very blessed. That's for sure. Yes, ma'am.
Well, you have talked about this, and I just want to add two things that I've heard that I also think inspired me. When you mentioned that there was a whole vigil that set up when you were hurt, and that firefighters kind of, I guess this is normal, shows my ignorance about the whole fire department, but that they came and kind of gave you round the clock, just somebody sitting by your bed, and that was important. I thought that was very moving. I didn't realize that. And then something your wife said that I thought is, you're just such a quiet, unassuming person, but I didn't know this about you. And she said, if he had lost any of his men, he just couldn't have lived. Like, there was a piece of him that wouldn't have been just saying, oh, but I at least survived. Like, that would have been worse to you than not surviving. And so I thought that was a beautiful statement about, again, just the power of the support of these men for each other and you for the men.
Well, I can't say enough about the support I got either from the department. They just, and the odd thing, and it's worth mentioning it is, and it's not odd, but it was shocking to me at the time, but I ended up being in the burn unit 32 days, and the Winston-Salem Fire Union, who didn't know me from Adam, brought food twice a day, every day, to the hospital. And this was during some of the worst weather you can imagine. I mean, if you think back what February and March looked like last year, and going to bed at the burn unit is no picnic, because you have to park, and then it seems like you walk for miles, and then take an elevator to the 10th floor of the North Tower, and they did that every day for 32 days. And even when we asked them, please don't, they were like, no, we're bringing it. And these are people that I didn't know, and of course the Greensboro guys were too, but they were also really, doing a lot for Suzanne. So all that, I can't say enough about them either.
When we were at the hospital with your family, and it seemed like there were 100 firefighters there. I mean, I didn't know who was fighting any fire. They were put down on another floor. And the other thing that impressed me about that was that your wife was so upset because she didn't know about. They wouldn't tell her about your colleagues, particularly Vicki, so she was really upset because she didn't know anything about whether Vicki was safe or not. And it turns out that Vicki was driving the truck,
Right.
Or she would have been in that position.
That's true. Right.
Wow. Sterling, other than the 6 minutes after the collapse, the attack y'all mounted and everything, as difficult as that was, compare that to the difficulty of recovery, psychologically, physically, emotionally. By what order of magnitude is there a difference there, do you think?
Wow. Because they're both so different. Obviously there were blessings in the 6 minutes, because number one, as soon as that mask glued to my face, and I just kept trying to breathe through it, and it got tighter and tighter, and I heard the chainsaws crank up, I started to feel the burns coming through my gear. But by the grace of God, that was it for me.
Right.
And so maybe, in a best case scenario, I was there for 2 minutes out of the 6. And I think that's helped me a lot, because if I had, and I've met another firefighter that was pinned in a building in New York for 20 minutes, and he never passed out. And he also got burnt to where things had to be amputated. And so that was a blessing to me. So while there's still the couple minutes that, obviously always be there, the recovery and the days in the hospital, that was, but just, it was, as bad as it was, or I shouldn't say as bad as it was, but as difficult as it was at times, I've just been overwhelmed. I just can't help but feel thankful, because I just really think that by all logic and all reason, there's no way I should make it out of that building. And and not to, go berate the point or anything, but just, it's really helped me a lot. And so I guess each of them has a piece, but it's kind of like apples and oranges, so to speak. Because the care and the burning, it was incredible. And then, like I said, the support and everyone here and the department and everywhere was just, all that was such a helped ease things. And, because the better, even the folks taking care of the home front, the better they made Suzanne feel, the better it made me feel. Because I knew I could be in the hospital, but she was there too. I mean, she was, I worried more about her because she's the one that running up and down the road in snow and bad weather. I knew I was going to be taken care of, but she also was my advocate in there and made sure that happened. So, and she's a former Marine, so she was good at it too. Or I'm sorry, there is no such thing as a former Marine. She's still a Marine.
How long before you're back on the line? What
I'm
they
not
say?
sure because I have to probably go for one more surgery. at
Maybe
least.
this year?
I hope so.
Good.
I mean, I hope it didn't go any longer than another year, but we'll see. Yes, sir, Atticus.
You'd like to know how many cars were in the building?
I'm not real sure, but I think probably somewhere on our side, because it was split into two sides and the other side was a body shop. I'm betting, or if I had to guess, I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 20 cars. And of course, the whole thing started with one car on fire. And,
So when you went dashing into this burning building with 20 cars in it, weren't you concerned that, gas tanks may explode?
well, actually, they don't really explode. That's a Hollywood thing.
Well, they do on the movie.
Right. What happened, what the worst cases can happen is what did, and that's they were working on a car on a lift with a fuel leak, and they were using regular light bulbs for their service lights, and they dropped the light bulb in the fuel and it lit off. And so this car ignites, but it also ignites right under the steel, or between, it was like between two of these, if these are the beams. And so, but when we got there, because people ask that, especially from the fire side of it, my thinking was that day, I've been dispatching a car fire, and I pull up to the building, and it's a masonry building, it's an auto shop, and so my thinking is, at that point, I saw a tremendous amount of smoke, but my thought process was, we don't have a car on fire anymore. Now we've got multiple cars on fire, and the associated contents with that. But never in my wildest dreams did I think that that perfect storm, like I said, that put us into this situation was going to, I just never thought about going on a car fire in a masonry building and having it come down on me in 13 minutes from the time I get up from, lunch to go. So, obviously hindsight's 20/20. Yes, sir.
I was curious because it seems like you have a very accurate timeline of everything. Is everything recorded as people arrive, or was that put together, or?
Well, I'm sorry.
Or afterwards, or did you compile it from?
It was actually put together. All that information is there because when we get on scene, it's, we have mobile computer terminals and we check on scene, but also the fire department hired an outside, and this was a proactive move, it wasn't, they hired some outside consultants called Facets Consultants, and they were the lead investigators on the Charleston Sofa Superstore where they lost 9 Charleston firefighters, and that's what they do is line of duty death investigations, but Chief Grayson brought them in because it was so close to examine. And I guess what I'm getting to is for this report and for our own internal, which we do post-incident analysis, all this is compiled and put together, timelines, So that's the only reason I know, because obviously my time frame's very limited.
Just a quick follow-up question too. Have there been any policies, and I know one of the answers, policies that have been implemented since the analysis?
Yeah, there's a lot of, and it's still an ongoing process, but just, and a lot of training initiatives. Things about the difference between commercial fires versus other types of fires. The policies, it's kind of a work in progress. I mean, there have been some policy changes, but for the most part, it's, just additional training on these type of fires and trying to prevent the outcome. But it's an ongoing work, so and nothing moves fast usually in policy. Not in the public sector.
Sterling, when you come up on a situation like that, all of us look back after the fact and say, let's let that one go. Let's just keep it from spreading. When you come up on a scene, who has definitely said there's no one in that building? Or is that what you have to assume? Somebody could still be in that building.
Well, we try to
go in.
We try to confirm it because that changes everything. I mean, if there's a rescue, we couldn't confirm it that day because we only had one property rep out of the 3. That's all I found anyway. And supposedly he told communications everybody's out of the building. But again, you have 3 separate businesses. So, we don't know that, but a rescue changes everything. Rescue is, we have different policies. If we send 2 people in, we have to have 2 people out to rescue them if something goes bad. But in a rescue situation, we don't even, we try to we go in anyway. And that really wasn't the case this day because everybody was out of the building, but we just didn't know it. So.
Captain Sterling, thank you for